living with it. As I found out, she lives in Fredericksburg. Her name is Willome. It took me a while to find her, but once I found her, she agreed to come. She's going to talk about her book, The Joy of Poetry and Love and Other Mysteries. So if y'all would welcome Megan Willome.
Thank y'all so much. There we go. That's better. Can y'all hear me okay? All right. First off, can we give it up for Doug Burr? That was well, thank you all for inviting me. Thank you, Betty, who found my book in a used bookstore in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which I think is very fun. All right. So I'm going to talk tonight about poetry and the crisis. Poetry during the crisis, poetry after the crisis, and poetry before the crisis. So that phrase comes from Joy of Poetry, which is a memoir with a bunch of poems in it. Some are mine, some are from other people. And it's the story of losing my mom and finding poetry. And one of the things I wrote in here, in the chapter called There Will Never Be Enough, Poetry of the Crisis. I didn't know that poetry, reading and writing it, would serve me well in hard times to come. I wish losing my mother was the last rotten wind to blow through my life, but no. There have been other deaths, other tragedies. I've had poetry for every crisis. This is the gift of poetry that I think is unique. Partly because it's short, partially because all of us poets put a lot into a few words. So it gives us, you know, the old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. A poem is usually a lot less than 1,000 words, and it really gives you something to hang on to. So, but here's the interesting thing about crisis, is it's usually not just one thing. As you get into it, as you move back from it, it's not all bad. You start to see maybe something good came out of it here. Maybe I changed, maybe someone else changed. There's this conjuncture. And the person I know who has written about that the best is a woman named Anne Alejandro. I don't know if anyone would have heard of her, but y'all know Naomi Shiadnai, the poet. Amazing, amazing. She came to Fredericksburg for our book festival this year, and she was the editor to help put this book together. She knew Anne was from Uvalde, and this is essays, poems, thoughts, just pure poetry, even when it isn't a poem. So this is Anne Alejandro in the chapter on land, and I think this is going to help guide us as we think about writing poetry in crisis. This is about the conjunction of snakes and bluebonnets that happen at the same time. Now, I know I'm in Denton. I know y'all don't get as many bluebonnets as we do in the hill country, but you know about them, right? Okay. She writes, in March, the bluebonnets will be glorious, so you must come, but in snake boots, because they emerge furious and snapping in teeming hordes from dens on exactly March 6th. We can roast marshmallows and listen to the multitudinous bands of coyotes, and we will have no armor. We will await the purpose of the day, and though we nearly miss it, the purpose of the day is watch, listen, learn. This is our job as poets, to watch, to listen, and to learn. And it's never more important than in the crisis. So, as I said, Joy of Poetry was built out of the crisis of losing my mom. She had cancer most of her life growing up, but when it appeared again in 2007, we knew she wasn't going to pull through. And poetry had been something that had been part of my life, but I had let it go. Wasn't sure I wanted to devote myself to it, but as soon as we got this word that it wasn't going to be good, I decided to start writing poems again. I wanted to remember everything. So this was my poetry during the crisis. I wrote 72 poems, and most of them are terrible, okay? But I needed to write all of them, and I'm so glad to have them all, because now they are all memories. There are about 12 of them in this book. So what's really great about writing poetry during the crisis is it helps you to pay attention to small things. Because if you just decide, I want to write about the death of a family member, that's important, but it's hard to do it in a way that connects with people unless you get super duper specific. So, one of the poems I'm going to read from it is called Still. And it's because my mother loved bluebonnets. And I live in bluebonnet country. Everyone comes down in March and April. But I noticed on my walk there was this one clump of bluebonnets in someone's yard that was still going 4th of July, which was ridiculous. How on earth was this little clump, and it was like 3 bluebonnets still going? Well, it was getting the sprinklers. That's what bluebonnet was still doing. So I thought, oh, this might be an interesting way to write about my mom, who just kept going and going and going. Still. A clump of bluebonnets stands in the alley long past Memorial Day. Usually they're fried by Easter. In the spring, they grow in green pastures beside busy highways. Now they look tired, out of place, like they didn't get the notice that it's time to make room for the warm wildflowers. Tomorrow is Independence Day, and they're still there, barely blue. The Mexican hats, the wine cups, even the fire wheels have faded. Those stubborn bluebonnets hang on, like my mother, still driving through cancer after cancer after cancer. So if I had just written those last few lines about my mom still thriving, it's interesting, maybe it's a little inspirational, but it's not. It doesn't connect with people the same way unless you have that specific image of a bluebonnet that's hanging on a lot longer than it should and doesn't look too good, right? So I think this is the gift of writing during the crisis. It helps you to pay attention. And oftentimes you write about things you might not have thought to write about. So the other one I'm going to read from this collection. Once I realized I was going to be writing a bunch of these poems, I had my phone with me to make notes. I had a notebook with me, and on Groundhog Day of that year, got the call from my parents that she's done, no more treatment. And it's Groundhog Day, we're close to Valentine's Day, so I take the call at a coffee shop because I didn't want to take it at home. And then I went to the grocery store and I'm assaulted with all the Valentine stuff, which was not at all what I wanted to look at that moment. And even at the time I'm thinking, oh, this could be a poem. So here we go. This is called Valentine's Chai. Sitting in a sunny cafe, I call my parents because I can't stand to hear bad news at home. So I call from here, on my cell, armed with chai. She's telling the doctor, no more. She will leave his office with some pills that will lengthen her sweet tooth in time for Valentine's Day. I quaff my tea and head to the store for candy hearts, chocolate hearts, Reese's peanut butter hearts, heart-shaped cookies piled with icing, any confectionery way to say, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. So that's poetry during. I found that real easy. There have been a other crises where I needed time. So this is poetry after the crisis. You know, my husband and I were about to celebrate 33 years of marriage next week. And when our kids were young, everything was great. And then when our kids became teenagers, we didn't know what the heck we were doing. And things went downhill, and they're still pretty downhill. But I didn't know how to write about that, because it's one thing to write about cancer, which affects a lot of people but is neutral. It's really another thing when you start talking about interpersonal family relationships. And I wasn't sure how to do it. So one day I was in an exercise boot camp class that met super early, and we were at the high school track, and I was walking it with my priest. There were other people running, we were walking. And he was Irish, and he went through the troubles. So he asked me, "Are you writing poems about your troubles?" And I said, "No." And he laughed at me. And he said, "Well, then what are you writing about if you're not writing about your troubles?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm writing about trees, flowers, birds, you know, anything but." And he said, which meant, why don't you write about both? Because I'd learned to read between the lines with him. So my first thought was, you know, we went to Colorado almost every summer with our kids, and we did a lot of hiking. And I had books on every hike we'd ever taken. I have patches from Rocky Mountain National Park for every hike we'd taken. And I thought, that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start by writing about the hikes, because it's a good, once again, very tangible way to talk about things. Hikes are hard, right? That's the snaky part. But then you get a bluebonnet part. You climb to a beautiful view, or maybe you go to a beautiful lake, or maybe you see animals along the way. So that was the start of my book that just came out in November, which is all poems. It's called Love and Other Mysteries. But I knew it couldn't just be hiking poems. I wasn't sure how to organize it. This collection took me 10 years to write. Not 10 years of writing it, but some of the poems are 10 years old, some are newer, because I needed time and space to figure out how to tell this story. Because it kept changing, right? If I had written it 1 year in, it would have been very different than it is now, 10 years in. So what I ended up deciding after playing with many different organizational formats was to write about love and mysteries. So the love poems are based on the 8 chapters of Song of Solomon in the Bible, because I found out that writing about longing can take many forms. So you can write about longing in a very sad way, losing someone. You can also write about longing and use it in a romantic way. And that was a lot more fun. So I started writing love poems. Then the mysteries poems are for the 20 mysteries of the Rosary, which follow the life of Christ. So suddenly writing about something that was hard and snaky became something that was a lot more bluebonnety. Not in a way where everything was fine, but I had a different way to talk about it. So, poetry after the crisis. This is one of the hiking poems. It's called Bierstadt Lake, which is a hike at Rocky Mountain National Park that I've done more than once. We've done it with the kids, we've done it alone, we've done it in summer, we've done it in winter. This is in the Glorious Mysteries section in the Resurrection part. And all the stuff that we went through with our family, it was hard on us. And anyone who's been married for more than 5 minutes knows that marriage is hard, right? So this is a poem about resurrection and our marriage. So Bierstadt Lake, Rocky Mountain National Park. My wedding ring, sir, last seen at Bierstadt Lake, where I took off my glove to eat a burrito, my bad, and oops, my ring came off with it. I have no faith it'll be found after we stumbled over our snowshoes, following orange flags until the parking lot appeared, finally. Ma'am, says the heron of a man presiding over the visitor center desk, a man too tall and too young to know anything of nuptials. After the snow melts, you wouldn't believe how these things reveal themselves. High summer, the nativity of St. John the Baptist. The priest of the visitor center rings me up. "Ma'am, things always turn up when you stop expecting." And then here's one of the love poems, and I offer this for all of us who, you have a poem, you've been working and working and working on it, and you just know it's not that good, and you don't know how to make it better. This particular one, this is for chapter 6, Song of Solomon. I had it as a sonnet, and it just was a pretty bad sonnet. It was pretty much like a sonnet you would write in 8th grade when your teacher made you write a sonnet. It wasn't good, it wasn't interesting, I didn't know what to do with it, so I just put it away. And then that particular night, I have to say, we have a fantastic newspaper in Fredericksburg Standard Radio Post, just won best paper in Texas in its category. It's a weekly. So I ate dinner. Wednesday, the paper came, decided to look at the paper. And at the time, we had a really creative headline writer for the police report. And this was the headline: "Man steals heart, no charges filed." And I went back in my room and I rewrote the poem. And it was hardly changed. So this is another reason to watch and listen and pay attention, because you never know what wonderful gift you will be given that will help you write what you need to write. So, in Song of Solomon, if you haven't read it in a while, it's ancient erotic love poetry, and there's a man speaking and a woman, and it's not always clear who's speaking. Okay? So as I do this, I'm going to kind of turn, because I have it have one voice in italics and the other not. So here we go. He strolls into my store, takes his time, ever browsing, never buying. Did you make all this? Yep. You know what they say, creativity is next to godliness. I heard it cleanliness. That's a bad translation. This place appears so peaceful and sad. I'm waiting for someone. All this is for them. That's daunting. Have they come? Not yet. But I'm making something new. This is the one. They'll lay down their arms and come. With arms, you can dance as well as fight, I guess. It takes a lot of arrows to create the way you do. That's not exactly the kind of love I was going for. Please, sir, avert your eyes. They unsettle me. You want what you can't have, so you want something else you can't have either. He palms a heart-shaped rock, winks, I'll take this, then strolls out the door adding, hey, tonight there's a dance up on the mountain, a whole wedding. Want to come? I follow, leave my beloveds on the shelves, press no charges, only his hand. So we've covered poetry during the crisis, and then poetry after. What about poetry before? I got to thinking about this when a friend of mine recently wrote a poem, and she had this line, but poetry can come before disaster. And I thought, I don't know what that means. I'm gonna get out my journal and write until I figure out what I think that means. Because like any good poet, she doesn't know what it meant. She just wrote it, right? So I started thinking, what does poetry before the disaster, before the crisis mean? And I think what it means is all of us writers need a poetry practice. It needs to be part of our writing life so that we are prepared when the crisis comes, whether it's during or whether it's after. And I know I'm going to sound like a piano teacher telling you need to do your scales, but this is what I believe in. Every writing day needs to have a regular poetry practice. What does that look like for you? That's something you get to decide. For me, that means a few things. That means I'm reading poetry every day. That's how I start my writing day. A mixture of both old and new. New poems bring a freshness and a directness. Old poems give you rhyme, they give you meter, they're such a gift. I think you need both. So I have like a poetry subscription service that I read. I have another one that I listen to where they also vary it between contemporary poetry and older poetry. I like a little bit of explanation, but not much. I don't want to know what the poem means. I want to know how it works. The question, what does this poem mean, is really the most useless question you can possibly ask. The question, how does it work, is the most important. Why did they break a line here? Why is there a stanza break there? Why is there an internal rhyme? What effect does that have? How does it change the poem by having that? What about this image? Why did they use a bluebird instead of a cardinal? Or why did they not identify the bird? These are the kind of questions that really help you know how a poem is working, and then how you can help yours work. I cannot tell you, well, I do have it listed in the back. So many of my poems have come from other poems that I've read, from being inspired. So I think that's part of it. Reading it, I'm also always, and I can't recommend this enough, reading a collection of poems. It's narrative. Right now I'm into, do y'all know Malcolm Guite? He's an Anglican poet. Yeah, he writes a lot of sonnets. Like I said, the first sonnet I was writing was pretty bad. I'd like to get better at sonnets. That seems like something I should know how to do. So I'm reading a lot of him right now. Before this, I was reading an anthology that had a mixture of people. So I think both are really valuable. When you read a collection, you get the whole arc of the story. It's like reading a novel if it's good. It's not just poems thrown in there. They've put a lot of time figuring out how to organize them and how they tell a complete story. So that's why I enjoy that. The other thing that I do, and I did this so reluctantly only because my publisher at the time had me writing a column on it, is poetry memorization. Has anyone here, even in school, ever had to memorize a poem? Okay, more of y'all than me. I never had to do that in school, which is a travesty. When you memorize a poem, you learn it on a whole other level. So I take in my writing day literally 5 minutes. 5 minutes of just listening to it, saying it, going through it until I have it. Usually takes me about a month, depending on the poem. This is, if you do start memorizing poetry, you will want to memorize older poems because they're easier to learn when they rhyme. So, I'm going to do one for you before I leave. And I need to set this here because I have to count it on my hands. You figure out tricks. Does anyone know Jane Kenyon's Let Evening Come? Okay. Jane Kenyon is one of my favorite more contemporary poets. She died in the 80s, but she died pretty young, in her 40s. She was married to Donald Hall, also a very, very well-known poet. She kind of eclipsed him for a while. Even though she died from cancer, she didn't write about it as much. She wrote a lot more about depression, but she writes about it so beautifully. So, Let Evening Come by Jane Kenyon. Let the light of late afternoon shine through chinks in the barn, moving up the bales as the sun moves down. Let the cricket take up chafing as a woman takes up her needles and her yarn. let evening come. Let dew collect on the hoe abandoned in long grass. Let the stars appear and the moon disclose her silver horn. Let the fox go back to its sandy den. Let the wind die down. Let the shed go black inside. Let evening come. To the bottle in the ditch, to the scoop in the oats, to air in the lung, let evening come. Let it come as it will, and don't be afraid. God does not leave us comfortless, so let evening come. So my final poem is from my middle book, which is just a lot of fun. It's called Rainbow Crow. It's all form poems for kids. They're all about crows. The reason I wrote this poem is because I paid attention during a disaster. My son was playing outside and he took off his glasses a la Clark Kent Superman, and there was a swoosh and they were gone. And he said, you know, he's screaming and crying that a crow stole his glasses. And I thought, that's crazy, that couldn't have happened. So I did some research, and guess what? Absolutely, that's what happened. And I got on a kick and wrote more than 50 crow poems. So this last one is Goodnight Crow, and it is based on Margaret Wise Brown's Goodnight Moon, which I know you've all read it, but I had no idea how complicated a poem this is until I tried to imitate it. So this is my Goodnight Crow. On the 13th floor, there was a great green tree and a big, deep nest and a picture of a crow swooping past the shore. And there were 3 little squirrels hiding their pearls, and a diamond ring, and a child's blue marble, and a mama crow quietly whispering, garble. Good night, floor. Good night, shore. Good night, crows swooping past the shore. Good night, puzzle. Good night, muzzle. Good night, spoon, and good night, room. Good night, halo, if you say so. Good night, bolts, and good night, toggles. Good night, universe. Good night, marble. And good night to the mama crow whispering, garble. Good night, midnight. Good night, wind. Good night, corvids, ever wind.